Charles comes in. Oh, okay, what's happening here?
Charles
the
is coming
boss.
home.
Charles is here.
Okay. I mean,
Yes, I'm here.
I'm bored of that kind of word already.
Good morning, boss.
Good morning.
Good
How's
morning.
everybody doing?
Good morning.
I'm trying to get
We
this
are
thing that
doing
says the
good.
meeting has a host.
We waited for you. And
Wait, I gotta
meanwhile,
get back in now. Something popped up. I
man,
may have to start all over again.
and we have a new lady that gives us the story of her life.
Oh, you mean Karen?
Who's that? Wait a minute, I gotta do it again.
Just turn your video on.
Well, no, I had it all good, then something popped up and the whole thing messed up. Okay, Zoom, there we go. Let's see if we can start it again. It says this meeting is being recorded by a host, and I
Yeah.
gotta get rid of that.
No, no, no.
How do I get rid of that?
No,
No,
you-
no, no,
Got it.
no.
no, don't,
Okay, I got it.
don't mess with it. It'll go
Okay,
away.
Charles, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. So I wanted to I told everybody else, but I want to tell you,
Okay.
I know you know the Dunwoody Fine Arts Association.
Yes, I know of them. Yes. Mhm.
Okay, so they had a gallery this last weekend and really some fine artists,
Mhm.
but my pictures sold for more than anybody else's. And it sold in the many hundreds of dollars.
Good. Congratulations.
I'm very shocked. I did not think mine were, I wasn't even going to show it because I didn't think it was good enough. I thought I would be embarrassed because theirs were all so much better.
Mhm.
But they were selling theirs for like $1,200.
Okay.
So I still don't know. But the problem is it's sort of abstract with lots of colors, big. And you know, from the very beginning, what I wanted to do was to have more skill.
Mhm.
This didn't take skill, it took creativity.
Wow.
So it's almost disappointing.
In
Well,
what
no, because
regard?
you're so affirmed. I mean, to make, a lot of money for me. But
Do you,
I mean,
do you
I would
feel,
think it's-
do you feel guilty making that money?
no, I don't feel guilty making the money,
All
but I
right.
feel like it reinforces doing that abstract stuff that, I just play at night. And and I don't feel like I'm a real artist,
Mm.
It's just stuff I stick on paper. It's not what I've always wanted to learn to do, really draw and really have it. But anyway, and the mayor even congratulated me on the piece.
Okay.
So I was excited anyway, but I'm not doing any more of that kind of stuff
Why not?
because it's
Shalom
boring.
Avital.
I've done it. It's boring now. It wasn't, I know that it wasn't hard enough.
Okay.
It wasn't, and it didn't really say, it was just,
It wasn't a
Simple.
challenge for you.
it wasn't a challenge. Yeah, exactly. I just was playing. And
Okay.
so, and yeah, honest to God, I don't think, I've done other pieces that I think are worth it. I didn't think this piece was worth it. I put it up there. I didn't expect it. I would have sold it for $25, $50. I put it up there because you had to put something up.
So let me, just play devil's advocate here. Okay.
Uh-huh.
And ask you, okay. One of the key things that I try to do
Right.
with everybody here, and when I was at Benson, teaching classes and things like that, it was to acquire some skills, okay,
Right.
and some basic understanding
Mm-hmm.
of what you're visually seeing and
Right.
different approaches and different ways that you could then treat that.
Right.
But beyond that, it was all about getting back to the point to where you could play.
Mm-hmm.
See, and the playing is an important part, to kind of follow follow your impulses, follow your ideas, trust your intuitions,
Mhm.
in creating something.
Really?
Yeah, it's not necessarily make it a formula, and I mean,
Mhm.
understand what you're doing, but when you're there in the moment and you're putting paint on that canvas or you're drawing
Mhm.
or whatever, there's the academic school of thought, which is about accuracy and, the sciences of
Right.
how you paint, and how you portray what we perceive as reality. And then
Mhm.
there's the other side, which is the creative part of it. And it's about
Mhm.
playing. It's about allowing yourself to find that thing that's in the inside of you, come out,
Mhm.
and express that.
Interesting.
So I wouldn't, I wouldn't discount the
Right.
the importance of the playing part. Okay.
Okay.
Is I guess all I'm saying to you. Okay.
And for
Um,
from the very beginning, my creativity is incredible, but my skill is very low.
okay. But again, the more you paint, the better you're going to get at working with color composition. It's
Mhm.
all about becoming aware of these things. And once you're aware of them,
Okay.
then work on improving, things like my composition or my value contrast or my use of color, or
Mhm.
whatever that is. That's
Mhm.
that's the progression of the growth of any kind of creative or artistic person.
Mhm.
Is there's a lot we don't know, right?
Right.
And as we get older and as we mature and as we do more work, what we find out is how much more we don't know.
Right. For sure.
Unfortunately, that's the process of life.
Well,
And
I just would have liked to have met this person who bought it and
Mhm.
ask him what they liked about it.
But yeah, you may not actually,
I can't,
I mean,
right. I
I
mean,
mean,
I can't find them anyway.
just appreciate the fact that somebody liked it, somebody bought it, that it's out in the world and somebody is enjoying it in their home or their office,
Right.
wherever they're going to put it.
Absolutely.
Anytime you sell a piece of artwork, you need to celebrate.
Yeah.
You need to have a little dance, a little dinner, a little bit of
Well,
wine.
I mean, because so much of their work is beautiful and they didn't sell it.
Mhm.
And it's
Yeah.
really high quality.
Well, but okay, again, that's you and that's your ideas and your views on other people's work.
Mhm.
Somebody saw that, somebody saw something in your work that they liked and they bought it.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
just be happy.
I am. I'm very, very happy.
Yeah.
But to sell a piece of work for you when you're not a professional for over $500 is significant, isn't it?
Sure. I mean, anytime, look, anytime you sell a piece of artwork, it doesn't matter
Mhm.
what the amount of money is. It's because it's not, in the end, it's not about the money. In the end, what
But
it's
I
really,
don't care.
yeah, in the end, what it's really all about is the fact that someone saw something that moved them
Right.
to the point that they wanted to live with that piece of artwork.
With that piece.
Yeah.
Yeah. They wanted to live with it.
Yeah.
That's a good way to put it. Well, thank you for that. I didn't want to take the class. I was just so excited. I really didn't think anything was going to sell.
Well,
I mean,
okay.
I didn't even begin to compare.
Okay, so we're gonna move on, okay?
Yeah.
And now
Yes.
we're gonna get in, and actually, you need to hang around, and you need to listen to this guy. I'm gonna do 2 videos today. One is fairly short, one's
Yeah.
a lot longer. We've done a lot of talking, and you've looked at a lot of work by different American artists like Charles Hawthorne and Henry Hinchy. Talked a little bit about Provincetown and about, the different art movements and things, particularly the American colorist art movement. So I'm going to introduce you to, now this guy is actually an academic professor. I can't remember exactly where he teaches, somewhere up in the Northeast. But he has a real good grasp of history and about different art movements, but more importantly, he's a painter himself. And so he begins to look at, the academic approach to painting in a very different way than maybe I would. And so, I think he's got some interesting ideas. I want you guys to give him a listen. You're probably going to want to have a piece of paper and a pen, because he shows a lot of different artwork. He talks about a lot of different artists. And if you see pieces and different artists that he's talking about, you might want to write their names down, okay? Because there's a lot of them, and he goes through them rather quickly, kind of nonchalantly, like everybody, is familiar with them, and, reality is they're not. But you could become more familiar if you just kind of jot their name down, go back, do your research. Just about everything that he shows is, like really high quality, really, really top-notch American painters. Because it's generally what he focuses on is, the American Impressionist and Colorist movement. That seems to be his area of expertise. All right, so I want to share that with everybody. First of all, good morning, everybody. How's
Good
everybody?
morning.
Eloise, Ilan,
Yes.
Good morning.
Bob,
Yes.
Good morning.
yeah, Avatal and Naomi. Yeah. Okay, it's good to see everybody here. Anyhow,
Hey, Avatar.
yeah, now I'm back on the little county computer today. I'm not going to get into that story. The Big Mac is down being repaired, and I should have it probably by the end of the week. Okay. They're supposed to give me, what everything needs to be done to it tomorrow. They're running the diagnostics on it. So, so we should be back, on the big computer fairly soon. So just bear with me. Okay. If there's an
Are you getting your emails for tomorrow's class?
Yes, I am. Yeah. Well, yeah, because I'm on the county computer, and so yeah, I get it through Outlook. The problem, on this computer is it doesn't have the same software. And so I have to save it into like the photos folders, on a Windows machine.
Right.
Which is
Yep.
awkward. It's just,
Yeah.
and there's not a lot of editing capability
No.
with these. So, it is what it is. It's fine, but we're here. And, happily, I've got this here, and it should be able to see us through for the next couple of days. Now, last time we were on this computer, there was an issue with you guys being able to hear the YouTube videos that I was playing. And I think I resolved that because I joined with the computer audio this time. And so let me know if there's an issue early on, because, mainly this guy talks endlessly. But he has some interesting things to say, like I said. So I'm going to share this with you, and we're going to do two
Tell
of
me
them.
his name again.
His name is Paul
Paul
Engelburton.
Engelburton.
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
All right. And he's a academic professor of, art. Anyway, so let's rock and roll here. Let's see, Gamel, Hinchy. Let's do the long one first, and then we'll do the short one afterward. Okay. Um, now I got to move them. Is this, yes, science of appearance. Okay. All right. Everybody see an old guy with a beard? Kind of looks like, well, he doesn't look like.
Yep, looks like you.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's got whiter hair than I do, and then I'm going to reduce the, the frame that we get to see each other in so that we can, kind of see him. All right. So away we go. Let me know if you can hear him. There's his name, Engelbertson. Okay. Yeah.
Bertson.
This is a follow-up on the last one, in which we talked about the sciences associated with painting, and I probably made a little bit of a nuisance of myself talking about all these various little things, but it's so easy to conflate non-visual elements of the real world with the visual, and to conflate, confuse, but also to equate them. And so Antiguous says, if you don't study anatomy, you'll always get it wrong, regardless of your surface treatment. And that's the question we're having as part of the discussion. Now, I'm going to suggest to you, well, what I left you with last time was saying to you that there's another science, there's a higher science than all the other ones. It's the science related to seeing, what Sargent referred to as retinal, and compared it with the advancement that he brought to painting, thanks to Monet. And he said it was equivalent with the discovery of perspective. Now, admittedly, I called perspective a science. And all we mean by science really is an aspect of the knowing, bringing to consciousness certain things that appear to be true in relation to aspects of what we're doing. And that is probably a very inadequate definition, but I'll leave it at that. But what I'm going to do tonight is just give you a mixture of quotes and a lot of pictures. And I'm probably going to be a little bit redundant because I want to show you a lot of different people applying this information. And I do want to ask you in at least one case whether or not you think that person has the anatomy right. But so if we can understand, where I left off last week, this big question about, do you understand values? That's our world. That's the world of sciences we're talking about now. Not the world of values as it relates to middle tones and things like that in the science of the way light works, but values in the sense of the ocular perception, what actually hits the retina of the eye. So Max Meldrum, I've referred to him before. It's brand new information to me as of about a year ago, that he'd written this book called The Science of Appearances. And he says the science of appearances concerns the knowledge of what happens to the human eye and its impact with exterior nature. So that's stuff like other things bouncing off of whatever you see in front of you. So it's your eye picking up purely visual data, right? It's one of the earliest and most important forms of knowledge, yet strangely enough has found to date no place in the programs of our schools and universities. Now, I assume he means no place in our art schools as well, but that's it's understandable. They may only make, he does say universities. Maybe in those days they had, some of them certainly did have better, more reputable art programs than today. But here's Sargent, seeing something else than the object. In other words, he's not talking about Monet, by the way. In other words, conscious of its own medium, that something else is what the impressionist tries to note exactly. Okay, what in the heck is that? Something else than the object. So he says Monet, not content with using his eyes to see what things were, and that's anatomy, right? Or perspectively, or in all the science of the light ways. Monet, not content with using his eyes to see what things were or what they looked like, as everybody had done before him, turned his attention to noting what took place on his own retina, as an oculist would test his own vision. All right, now that's a wildly different place. And what's fascinating about it especially in the sense of what this art is. If this is a visual art, meaning its purpose is to give us visual entertainment. It's fascinating it's taken us this long to get here. And well, I've talked about that before. But I want to show you this Vermeer, because what happened with Vermeer, apparently, is that he projected an image. Let's say he saw an image came through a lens and hit a flat surface, either a piece of tracing paper, so the lens could be here, and the tracing paper on this, the light on that side. Here's the lens. Here's the paper. So he could sit on this side potentially and see that. And some people have him looking inside the box. Some people have him looking through a hole through the box, which was receiving that image. There are many, many ways to see what happened to him, but what it was I call it a faux retina, because he was replicating what our retina actually does and what it sees. It's the visual data. It's the actual visual data, color to color. The red is the richest note out there in that particular painting, and the lightest note. These things this is the lightest note, shall we say? And all these things land in these sort of categorical places purely visually, not out of some idea or knowledge about light or where it's coming from and all those sorts of things. It's purely visual. So you can see what suddenly happened to Vermeer was he actually said, "Oh, that is what the world looks like," and he began, instead of painting out of his head and using formulas and all that sort of thing. And this is at a time when people had the excuse for using formulas and painting things that weren't very truthful, was that they didn't have the pigments for it. But when you look at what Vermeer is doing, he certainly did have enough pigments to indicate that what he had seen, and what he had seen was way more of a full spectrum real world in the same I don't know, embodiment as your eye receives it. But if you haven't done this before, pick up a lens, just a magnifying glass, and stand there in a window with a nice, beautiful, light, bright day. Stand there with this nice, brick building, any other thing on the other side, anything. Let it come through that thing and hold up a piece of paper and move it forward until you can see it. And before you know it, it'll be an upside down vision. But as you glance over, you'll be able to see that image is a Vermeer image. It's what Vermeer is seeing. And it's the equivalent of what your retina actually does. Now, why wouldn't it be important if that's actually what your eye does? And we're talking about the visual world, the world as perceived by ours. Why wouldn't that be a significant piece of a science when you're trying to actually paint what you see, right? Now, some people are saying they're painting what they see, but they're not interested actually in what they see. They're interested in a story, they're telling their story, making their nude be some sort of a symbol for something or whatever, you know what I mean, and have everything as a priority. But for students, how can your priority not be, among all these other sciences, and you know that I haven't dismissed all the other sciences, how can your priority not be learning to see the visual world as it plays out? And the canvas is such a wonderful place in that you actually can put all this retinal data on the canvas. And if you learn how to organize it, which is what this science really is, first it's a naming of elements like chroma, hue, value, those sorts of things. But then it's an organizational problem after that, isn't it? How big is this one in relation to this one? Where does it land in relation to this one, and so on, right? And what do they do where they meet? Well, that's the most foundational science. And I was saying to Antiguous last week to all of you that you can't even draw bones accurately if you can't manage the value relationships and where they land in relation to each other. So that's where we're going now. This is that discussion of that science, but I'm just giving you a lot more background. So again, when I said values last week, everything you see depends on light and shade, right? We could express gratitude to God. In the beginning, he created light, so we could see what he was doing, right? So we could see what he was making or whatever. But separate the light from the darkness. Well, that's what our eyes do initially, and everybody accepts that. We do dark things, light things. We see that that's actually true, and it is. But we don't incorporate color. So you have to see values, and you have to see them rightly related to each other. You have to practice that until you're really good at it, right? But you have to get that that's a real thing. It's a real phenomenon. Everything's made out of the values, and the values being right to each other. In any visual ensemble, in the world as you see it, right? And that could be an arm, or it could be everything. This entire scenario that I'm sitting in. So those value relationships, and then there's the value transitions, and don't underestimate that. But the value transitions, this guy Meldrum talks about the speed of transitions, or I forget what he calls it, value speed or something. But it's the speed with which a value goes from absolute dark to light is light, and their speed means what short distance does it take to get from there to there. Some places it gets over a longer period of time. So I'm not interested in the way people handle this science. I'm interested in that they get that it exists. Right? The way you handle it is entirely yours, but if you don't understand that it's there. So in the world of color, we have the color value, right, which is how dark and how light it is, literally just nothing more than that. We have the hue. Everybody knows about the relative redness, yellowness, or blueness of a thing. I say all the other colors in between. Everybody understands you could have any, especially these days with the ability we have to make material to print. You can print any color you can even begin to think of, right? So that's the hue color that way, but also then the color saturation, which is the intensity of the color. And people don't know, unless you understand the science, that the intensity of the color is one of those elements in projecting light. And your picture will not have the same light content if it doesn't have the same intensity. It can even be just some brown that relative to the whole picture, or relative to life isn't very rich, but if it's the richest thing in your picture, it'll have an element of light that other browns won't contain. So that's the color saturation, and then the color relations, right? And then color play. You know, and you're watching this thing here, and you're seeing, oh, this green picks up some other greens, and some other, you know, and the skin tones, you know, on me or my hair or whatever, they pick up things around here, and they play to each other, right? That's where this beginning of this conversation starts happening about what's the real music of our field, right? You know, is it a figure that looks like Hercules, or is it actually the play of color, form, light, and all these things that are literally the function of the visual of the retina, right? What gives you pleasure, right? And I say that meaning strictly as an eyeball, as a person who's, you know, it's almost like going into the room and saying, listen to that song. And people used to do this with Bob Dylan. That we loved his sort of his quasi-profound, pseudo-profound, whatever, poetry. But golly, you're hard pressed to call what he was doing music. And then somewhere a little bit along the way, you heard Linda Ronstadt. And I mean, like, I remember being staggered by the quality of the music, of the sound, you know, the music. And that's our world. It's the color game. It's all that stuff of the eye. You know, it's like the vocal versus the visual. I don't know. But if you're not good at that, where's the fun? And so is it just illustration for you? And yeah, the guy who illustrates and who uses this best as an illustrator, who gets that there's also this element of that music, is of course a better illustrator than the guy who doesn't. Hence, you must participate in this science as well, right? So then you have the world of angles. I'm going to talk about these other ones. Let me go through a couple of the pictures, talk about just the values of the colors, and show you what I mean by this, so you don't get confused. I should stop at this one first, because in this one here, I'm trying to show you the close-up of the. This is the Joseph DeCamp, the Blue Cup. It's a stunning piece of work by any standards, and you need to see it if you ever go to the MFA. It's probably as close to being the single picture you ought to look at as anything in that museum. And I say that with due deference to Jerome and the Eminence Grease and a couple other things. But what I want you to observe, though, is the anatomy in this hand over here, right? Because you can see the characteristics of that bulge that we all have in this grouping of stuff, veins, and other things. The massing of the form above the wrist, the articulation of the bone and the other bone down here and out here. This guy isn't missing anything anatomical, is he? And they look like they're all in the right place. She doesn't look like she has a deformed arm. And I'm betting you that he didn't sit there and do an anatomy thought. Now, it doesn't mean that he wasn't aware whether the anatomy was wrong or not. If he was working on it, he saw the anatomy was funny, he kept working on, well, that value should have been higher. This should have been further over there. And so there's an awareness of anatomy that might have been helpful. But this guy is a painter who painted from effects, right? So he's not into drawing an arm and doing the anatomy on the arm. He's into doing effects. And when the effect, for example, is strong enough, like on this one here, it is strong enough to have to articulate that thing, that thing. What do I mean by that? Well, that dark meets light and has a certain transition, middle tone transition there. And he gets it in the right place. He gets it the right angle, gets it the right size, and he gets it the right, and it produces that right effect in relation to other things on the page, right? And that's his job, and he's good at it. And he pulls things together and he says, yes, that's whatever he might say. If the wrist looks funny and he understands a wrist, he's going to, of course, say that. By the way, I want to say all humans understand anatomy on some serious level without studying anatomy. In other words, we tend to recognize when a thing's off. So that's kind of an interesting problem just on its own. And it's one of the reasons that some of the anatomy schools, people that teach how to paint by drawing anatomy, they're so difficult to look at because nature does not look like that in so many of these cases. And yet it's not a bad thing to have understood it and to have drawn and all that sort of stuff. I'm not trying to take that away from anybody. So if you go down to this one, it's much the same thing. His analysis is anatomy of the face in relation to the eye, or this person, by the way, the same thing. In relation to the cheek, you can't find faults with that. With a hand, you could. But with this guy, you cannot do that. These bones appear to be in the right place. The masses of the muscles appear to be doing the right thing. And I'm willing to bet you that he did it just like this, not from anatomy, but from effects, right? Well, I'm willing to bet, I just know. So, so what effects do you have to work on, right? Okay, so everybody knows about the lightest light, say that, this, whatever it is, the lightest light, the darkest dark, wherever that shows up. And
Okay, I'm gonna stop him for a second, okay? Can everybody see the three paintings that he's got highlighted right now?
Yep.
Mhm.
Okay, if you look at the painting to the right, okay, and it's the woman in the kimono. I don't know how many of you have ever been to the High Museum of Art,
Yep.
but if you haven't been to the High Museum of Art, you need to go for this one painting right here. Okay, it's in their permanent collection. It's up on, I think, the third floor.
Right.
And it by far is one of my three favorite paintings that they have in their collection. Okay,
Really?
it is, and just go look at it. And it's a large painting, but just go look at the actual painting and how it was painted, the color, the brushwork. I mean, it's an amazing painting, just all on its own. Okay. And, it's, if you do nothing else, go to the High, take a look at this. And, there's this painting, there's a couple of paintings by Twatchman there that each and every one of you really need to go look at if you're wanting to be a painter, okay? Or if you're wanting to learn to paint. Because I mean, 35, 40 minutes in front of this painting right here, just really looking at it can tell you everything you need to know about, using paint. So anyway.
Who's the artist?
I'm trying to remember the name of the artist. He wasn't terribly well known. He'll tell us here in a minute. Okay. But I mean, I've spent a lot of time in front of this painting and it is amazing to look at. So, and it's right here in Atlanta. So.
here's the lightest light and darkest dark of this one. The most chromatic notes, right? These are all categorical places, right, in pictures. And you have this need to be organizing these things in relation to each other, right? So you have two parts of the science. The first of all is understanding of those ideas, chroma, value, light, and then their relationships to each other, right? I say value, I meant light. I just meant value. I meant light, dark, light. But if you go to here and you don't know how to articulate this sharp edge, and don't know when to articulate, there's more of the science, when to articulate this sharp edge, you'll not know whether this value is right. You can put this value down all day and make it look right to this one or some other ones. But until you have that edge there, until you have the edge play between this one and this one, you'll not be sure. You can't be right. You can't know you're right. You're just guessing. So the edge plus the contrast plus the intensity equals light, right? And how much light is a function of the relationships within the picture. We don't paint the sun with the yolk of an egg, right? We don't. It's an impossibility, right? So Yeah, but that's the ocular world. That's the retinal world. All you see up here is a redder red, a more neutral one here, a darker yellow here, a lighter yellow here, things like that, a greener yellow, whatever, and various things like that, right? And you see the value play from one to the next, to the next, to the next. And your job is simply to organize it and to be good at organizing it. That in itself is its own science, but that takes a ton of practice, right? So in a sense, we're naming all those things you have to be able to do to be good at basketball, and then you're going to be thrown onto the floor and you have to run up and down doing all these things that if you're just busy thinking about them now for the first time, you're not going to do it very well. You'll be tangled up in your own feet and so on. So the world I'm getting at, though, is a fairly simple one. Every single one of these pictures, you're going to see the same thing. You're going to see the order of effects, the order of edges. See the sharpness of this edge here. What does it compare with? Well, it compares with this one, and it compares with this one. This one wins, right? But that's the order of the effects, and the order of the edges plus the contrast that produces the effect. And so there's a series of these things that live in their own family, just like reds live in their own family, or the blues. They live in their family relationships, and they have to be right to each other within that relationship, and they have to be right in the world of contrast, right? One of the things you don't have to understand if you're doing our world is you have to understand the world of relationships, which is a two-part world. It's actually three, but the third one is complex enough that if you can't do the first two, you're not going to deal with it. The contiguity is what it's called. I was a student, went to the encyclopedia when Gamble started talking relationships. Other people did too, and I just finally decided to think this through per Gamble's desire. And I went to the encyclopedia rather and looked up the word relationships, or I think it was there as relationships. And they described the Greeks. The Greeks figured out what relationships were, right? And they are similarity, contrast, and contiguity. That's what they came up with. And apparently nobody's actually done anything different. I've not seen any reason to think about anything different. But this here is contrast, right? And when you see a hair like this value disappearing into this, that's a similarity. Or when you see this value and this value appearing to be the same, they're similar in value. Now this one may be bluer, well that one is, you might say, redder, or this one may be more chromatic, well that one may be less chromatic. You're still dealing in a world that has, they're like this way and they're different that way, and that's our world. You have to be good at it, okay? It's really kind of, and I don't mean to take the joy out of this, because actually what happens, and the thing I think you really have to be best at is beauty, right? Because if you don't see what this is doing to this, playing to something else, and how interesting that is, right? And if you don't find the play of light, the play of edges, and the fascination of those things, first of all, you won't be able to take it to the level of music because you're not playing with the right stuff. You're not playing the stuff of our eyes. But even to be accurate, you got to see these things. You got to see the precise relationship, say, of this light right here to this one, and the way they played with each other. If you're a listener, you have to sit in the woods and just be Wordsworth. You have to just listen to where the fun hits. And then all of a sudden you say, I get what's happening. And you see it like in sets, like the long line, you see it in sets. So in the lay-in, you can see how this is operating differently. There's no preliminary drawing of outlines of objects and anatomy and all those things. Each one of these persons is doing some anatomy, like the bone structure of the head. There's anatomical rightness, areas like this. Even the presence of ankle suggestions, shape that relates to anatomy is being done by effects, by relative contrast, by the right color to the right color in the right place at the right angle, and so on. And so everything we're doing here and setting up the page, we're getting the effects, this light effect here, right? To get the exit out here, we're getting this light effect, right? So we're doing all the drawing, including the locating the design on the page, by getting the effects, the light effects, right to each other, right? Now, if you don't know how to make a light effect, that was a big deal for me. It was one of the first things that I finally broke through in the Brackman world when I was just a student, like any number of other people that you all know, friends online, David LaFell, I think was, but maybe he wasn't, but Daniel Green was, and others. But the idea of actually embracing the Impressionist mindset and hearing what they have to say is a pretty big deal. But the essential thing, the key thing, the two things that were said by Brackman, one is all relationships. And he would keep saying, I don't see the light yet. I don't see the light yet. And you know what I mean? And so one day we came in there and he's looking at a painting of one or two people over there, and he said, you guys have the light. And that kind of a thing is like, this is very stirring, Oh, now I see what you're going for. And I looked at it and I said, it's not very accurate. It's not that light. but dang if it isn't lit. It has that feeling of light. And whenever a dark meets a light, there is a feeling, there's an element of light. Even when this softer edge one over here meets, that sense of light here, you have to have a capacity to understand that. This is not science, okay? This is not the science of anatomy. It's bigger than that. You can't make a bone without understanding the science. Okay. And then, by the way, so in all these cases, here's the dark is dark, the light is light. This is our science, and then where they are in relation to each other, and who's on first in terms of the contrasts, and then who are useful in terms of the placement to play, all these locating places and all those sorts of things. There's a whole lot of that to that craft, which you're going to have to learn to sort out. But in each case here, you can see that these guys have articulated the order of the edges. This is a Sargent, by the way. This is my copy of a Sargent. But I was just copying it. I think it was a finished work, but I was copying it to see if I could understand the way he likely approached it, if he did it like we do. And that was my approach there. So you can see how I made something out of this. And so just any number of places, everybody gets that you make something out of that, but why did I make more out of this and less out of that? Well, that's what he'd done. He had that sort of, like what here, and certain inside, like this inside edge, and this cut right here. This is the visual order. Look how strong that guy is. It's very strong, and it has to be right to this one, right? And to everything else that has that kind of play in it. You can say it's easy to see maybe these sharp contrasts, but they're fairly lit. This one, and others like this one, even that one. If you see those things and you can get them rightly related to each other, you'll be able to win in our game. So, but in the world we're talking about values. You can see in the Benson on the right, we're talking about spots, right? These are spots of value. And so here's the darkest dark, and there are various ones spotted around. And the way they're deported, right, is what you have to be good about doing, right? The music is not in the fact that they're dots. It's in the placement on the page. And that's our science. That's the science of the, and by the way, it can become just a purely abstract science in which you say, well, I'd like it here better than there because, and you have to have a really good reason, which that's another discussion. But you can see that he's got, lightest lights, whatever the big picture is of light, then he has these middle tone spots doing their thing at different sizes to each other and having their own gestures and all these things. You have to be good at values, right? That's all I'm saying with that. In this one, you're going to hear a little bit later, you're going to hear Monet talking about the transitions. And when you see lights, and of course, Monet's painting outdoors, and he's doing fields full of one note, basically, but the color movement within them is a huge thing. At first, he calls it tone, but then he changes it to mean, it's clear to me he means color. But you can see the peachiness of this white dress here turning into the cooler whiteness of this dress with a slight value shift. These kinds of movements are part of the music. You'd be good at them, right? Not just the movements that make form, like you see in the woman's neck here. That's an important thing to be skilled at, right? We're talking about this is what your eye is doing. You have to grasp it. One of the points I make it later on is you have to be able to grasp it with your mind's eye beforehand. In other words, you look at it and you wait till you see to have ownership of it. If you know it's a value transition, you're going to own what it's doing. So there are elements to that you have to just get good at. And again, I'm talking about just to draw the anatomy. I mean, the tube is part of the anatomy. If you can't articulate the tubularness of that particular piece of anatomy, then you're not in very good shape, right? You won't be in good shape. But the transitions, one of the things that's really amazing about him, and in the blue cup previously, I wonder if I can show you that. In the blue cup, the background wall, you can't see it well here, but he appears to have been working in a studio in which there was a brick wall, and he would have his window shade up some, but the brick wall seemed to go up, and the sun would hit the brick wall. This is the north-facing side. It hit the brick wall and hit some of her. And then further up, you'd see cooler notes all down through here, and the wall would be moving, getting redder as it went to the top. And there are a number of his paintings, including a really interesting portrait at MIT's collection, that just shows that astonishing transition. But he's literally finding the beauty in the color movement in a wall. All right. So there's that, and the idea that starts and how it's different. So yes, it's the fading and passing tones within a tone. It's a nuance, for example, between the blue and the yellow. It's something that can only be expressed in painting. Now, why is that? It's because it's something that's purely ocular. If you don't, the canvas you're painting on is your retina, if you follow me. And therefore, all you got to be really good at is being objective about color value relationships, size relationships of those things. Follow? And keep it simple, stupid is really a very good way to think about it. But he's finding, in what he's doing, he's finding that you can't draw the human face. Get the unity of the head, and yet not have the movement from gold to the reds, to the greens, as they evolve, as they move, and still have unity. And he's finding ways to do it outdoors that are very similar to what you would do indoors, say, with pastel.
Mhm.
So there's Monet doing it, and you know what he's doing out there. He's just going out there and trying to make what he sees in 20 minutes, trying to make all the notes in right relation to each other, and seeing if what that does, right? Much in the same way as Vermeer, when he's looking at the screen, he says, "Man, I wonder if I can do that." And he moves over to his canvas and tries to imitate those notes, try to match those notes side by side and see what happens. Because in a sense, he's sort of anticipating something good is going to happen, but he doesn't know. He hasn't been there before. This is Vonna. This is Vinton, I think. These are the Americans. He thought highly of these guys and their ability to see light. Oh, that's a Metcalf. I'm sorry, Willard Metcalf. But the Americans really did pick up on this, loved it. There are parts of France that are very like New England in their sunlight, but you can see the wild difference between these things, and yet everything is about, look how it changes from green to red. That's what you got to be good at. Keep thinking about haystacks and the anatomy of haystacks, and you're going to be in so much trouble. You're not going to be playing with the music. You're going to be playing with the things and stuff, right? I think of it. I tell the women in my studio that when they do that, they're telling them the material girl. You got to stop being material girl and start getting to beauty. But you can see Soroy is applying the same information. Look at the wall here, the transition from cooler to warmer, because that's the way it was, and how he's playing the reds here, getting that really rich one, jumping over to here to one less so, and you see this grand movement of some of these notes through here. And you see the beautiful relationship of the three blues, or four blues if you want to count that one, of these by light, by value, etc. You see the order of edges, the contrast in edges. Now he had a tendency to block objects, and so sometimes you get extra edges, where other people like Boston School guys tended to have more of a lost and found approach. But the truth you're getting here, that's what your skill is looking at. That's what you're trying to be skilled at, actually. Can you master the truth of the impression of whatever comes to your eye? Because that's the first science, right? Because that's what you're doing every minute you're doing with your brush, that truth. And of course, eventually you'll get tired and sick of doing illustration because there's so much more music. That's me being for myself, so to speak. No, but I'm not kidding. I'm not doing that to be a joker. This is serious stuff. I have not found the pleasure when the lights go on in the picture, when the color play sings. I know I'm in the right place. And I was the guy. I did imaginative pictures with Gamble. I still have a bunch of them on the easel. But if they're not beautiful this way, they're not even interesting to me. I don't care what the subject is. Isn't this a marvelous thing, by the way, the evolution out of this brilliant area, this high chroma, into these lesser chromas, and then out to the grays, out as you feel this thing, right? A really magical kind of, that's the kind of stuff that is the color play. That if you see it and get it, you win, right? You're there, you're the artist. Until a realist isn't an artist, this doesn't have anything to do with anything. That doesn't mean there's not beauty in form, by the way. I don't mean to say that, but form is not realism. Form is form. Our world is, form is one of our players, right? And one of the forms is flat, right? Like the wall in the blue cup, the flatness of the wall is one of the forms. But the form of the neck that you saw is very important. Do you know how to play with form? Do you know how to make form? That's our world. That's our abstract world. And so is size and all those things. Look at the nuance. These are 3 different days. This is New England. This one might be too. I'm not sure that it is, but this is Bunker, and this is Vinton, and this one is Vonna, I believe, again. And here you are seeing the beaches, which could very well be the Essex or someplace, some New England, Cranberry Bog or whatever, or just the beach, near the beach. And but what you're seeing is color light play, and you're hearing music in these places. And if you don't see what that is, don't see what the value of that is, you may belong in a different business. I mean, like literally an illustration or something like that, which is fine. You can see now this is the intensity question, right? First of all, this is a low value picture, low value contrast, a lot of the tonalism world, things like that. This is high contrast, but also high chroma. This one isn't as a high chroma, but it almost looks funny in the context of this picture. At least this reproduction does. And I think it doesn't look that bad. That raw. It's sort of off a little bit in the intensity here, but this intensity, that intensity you have to be able to achieve to get this quality of light. You also have to get the right quality of edges and the right quality of intensity at the reds in those places, if that's what's making it happen, and so on, right? But you can see all these guys are playing with the same toys, right? It's color values and their relationships with each other, what happens where they meet, right? So you can see transitions. This is one of those things that Monet was just talking about, this transition from here, right through here by value and getting cooler or warmer or whatever, and then changing again as it goes, right? So that's the stuff of the retina, right? And if you know how to articulate sort of the effects at key places, you actually will have the stuff of human beings hanging out. So Sargent claimed, and this is Monet talking, Sargent claimed that Sargent himself wasn't an impressionist in the sense that he, Monet, understood the word. And they all decried the word impressionist. It was a sarcastic thing done to them to ridicule them by some writer, some art critic. But he said Sargent claimed that Sargent himself wasn't an impressionist in the sense that he, the Monet, understood the word because he was too much under the influence of his teacher, Carlos Duran. Carlos Duran drew his inspiration more from the Spanish school of Velázquez, which put its emphasis on correct values. Now, we're still talking about ocular, right? Because the world of values is really the key world. If you're being truthful, then we know what the light is light and dark is dark are, and we know the general tonality of the picture, and we know the order of the edges, the contrast, and their edge sharpness. It'll produce a lot of the same stuff. It doesn't bring you all the way there, but it'll produce the bigger part. Values are that important of light. So much so that you would say, you could see how a person like Sargent wouldn't particularly feel the need for anything more than that. So this is early Sargent. In both cases here, I think the Voigt thing was done way back. And by the way, there is a certain element of color. It's not like he doesn't see color at all. It's not like that at all. But you see his early one here. This has, you see it at the Clark Museum. It actually has a remarkable feeling of grayness, just like a general grayness. And you see that a lot, oddly, in Soroya's portraits as well. It's almost like they're operating from a formulaic mindset or a values-only mindset. Color doesn't matter. And you can understand that if you're thinking of portraits as photos of somebody, like snapshots of somebody. But nevertheless, you see what the visual world, even to Carlos Duran was, though. But it's the order of effects, right? There's an effect. These are key effects. People will tell you this can't be in focus. Look at this focused effect down here, off because it's too far out of the center. It's nothing that they don't do camera lenses. They do the retina. And when we look at the retina, one of the things you've got to be good at in our little field here, and I'm sort of listing these things now, understand that's what I'm doing, is you've got to be good at seeing the thing as if it were a two-dimensional flat thing already. So as if it were just a purely retinal image with no knowledge this way. You don't want to know deep. No, you just want to know the relationships of things this way. That's the gift of the retina. And it's the mercy of it too. And you wind up with the third dimension. And because you've made those relationships right by value, by contrast, by edge. All right, so I wanted to show you this because the picture on the left is Sargent, which we always liked and admired when we were young. There's a wall in Capri that he did at some point in his life, fairly young. And then this is Hibbert, who went to the same area. He's in Capri. And doesn't it look, I say this to students from time to time, doesn't it look like Sargent never saw color? He's got a wonderful light effect, but it's all being done by values and edges, right? By contrast. And to a much lesser extent, a little bit of chroma doing some stuff, because it does. But this is that search for the color note and its distribution throughout a painting. So this note green is related rightly to all the other greens in the painting. That's why he was raised, trained. That's Boston School training, by the way. Hibbert is a graduate. He's a graduate, and he's on his traveling scholarship, whatever they called that in those days. And you have to return with work. But most of them, he's a landscape painter and a very good one. If you need to look him up, Hibbard. Spent time painting the snowy hills of Vermont primarily. But you're seeing a different guy here, aren't you? Same age, roughly, maybe even a little younger than Sargent when Sargent did this. Probably not by much. But he's out here seeing something that Sargent had not yet seen. And that's the complete ocular. There's the complete picture, ocularly speaking, right? That is to say, the one that accepts that the color values have to be right at the same time. Not the colors, but the colors and their values, not just their values. So Monet bowled me over, says Sargent. And he counts as having added a new perception to artists, as the man did who invented perspective. One of these days, some genius will turn it to account and make it part of the necessary equipment of an artist. Well, I think the Boston School is that group of people. And I know that this guy, Meldrum, has written a book called The Science of Appearances. It's a very tedious way he has of presenting it, full of writing, But if you can read through it rather quickly, you're going to pick up these crucial central ideas that are very much the science that Sargent is looking for. Bowled me over, though. And he didn't. It changed everything. So there's Sargent on the left. Does that even begin to look like the girl at Capri? And it just gets more spectacular. I can show you all these watercolors and stuff. The one on the right is Sorolla again. And you can see these guys are all into the same kind of values play and the relationships of edges and contrast. And believe me, it's not knowing girls and knowing dresses and knowing water and knowing beaches, guys. The world is too big. The world is so full of a number of things. The only way you're going to be happy as kings is if you know how to manage it ocularly so that nothing surprises you. Nothing happens surprises you. Somebody once asked me, isn't the hand the hardest thing to paint? And at the time, I mean, I was at one time I thought that was true. It's very difficult, all these fingers, all this stuff, the complexity of it all. But when you become ocular, when you start operating from value masses and sizes of things and those kinds of things purely, then it's not any different from anything else you paint in the entire painting. It happens to be a smallish area, but it's usually often some complexity. But the complexity is all that's difficult, not the complexity of the way. The treatment's all the same. It's values and how big they are, how they compare with other things in the picture, and what happens with the edges. And I say what happens with the edges, and I do mean shape, because shape is one of those things you got to be good at. So that's that world, guys. So if you're not good at that, you can't have this, but you also can't have bones. Okay, I insist. You cannot have bones, not with any kind of accuracy. So I guess that was it. Yeah, actually. So thank you very much. Let me before I stop, let me go back to the beginning of this, so you guys can look with me at that list and see. Let me just see if there's anything I've left out. I'm sure this has already run too long. Yeah, but keep looking at that list. Keep thinking that list through. And I'm going to pull up, if I can do it, I'm going to pull up the slideshow one more time. And let me just get you to my list here. So this is the list, right? So I've talked about everything in here: form, including flatness, roundness, and form shifts.
Okay, I'm going to stop it right here for a minute. My suggestion would be, if you know how to, do a screen capture, because you might want to hang on to this. It's pretty useful. So let's see if I can do that.
I took a picture of my camera. That works too.
Okay. Yeah, that'll work. Okay. But this is kind of an extended, kind of convoluted list, but it covers pretty much so everything you're trying to get to know is right there on that list. So it would be worth having it and just kind of reading through it every once in a while and getting a sense of where you're at and what it is that you think you have a grasp on, what it is that you don't understand, and going back and trying to find out about those things, improve your skills in those areas. So it's could be helpful. And I'm trying to figure out how to do that very same thing, which is, how do you do a screenshot on a PC? So
That word execution, is that a typo or something?
let's see.
Last word.
Oh,
Execution, isn't it?
execution, I think. Yeah, it's a misspelling.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes, best methods for maximizing successful execution. Wow.
Okay.
I'm sorry. My mouth isn't working today. It's like hard to get words out. At any rate, yeah, so I would highly recommend that you photograph it, do a screen capture, if you need to sit and physically write it down, you could do that, whatever works for you. But it's, pretty useful. Everybody got that?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, so let's let him wrap up.
I've talked about shape, but not much. So I haven't talked about the complexity of shape, but you got to be good at that. You don't have to draw outlines of objects to draw shape, to understand shape, to be master of shape. The organization of the relationships, you have to be good. It's the most rich thing and what the other pillars are, all in relation to it. What's the red, the yellow, and blue, shall we say, of a picture? You have to be good at that. You have to be good at, so there's that organization of those relationships. The conceptualization is a big thing. And I didn't say much about that, but I did say a little bit though. You have to be able to preconceive the idea of the form movement. And everything we do, because it's purely visual though, becomes predictable. And you wind up with a shorter vocabulary. I've compared this to phonics, right? Phonics is a science. If you don't know that, you might want to think about that. Phonics is a science too. And so phonics reduces what would otherwise be an incredibly complex language, like Chinese is like, I don't know, it's some million number of figures. But English, it's a phonetic language, it's sound-based. So we figured out what's a letter that would be a symbol for the sound, and we realized there are only 44 sounds in English language. So all kids have to really learn to be good at reading is that. And you don't even have to learn all of them to get the hang of how that works, and then just you'll gradually pick up being really good at it. Well, this is the same game. This is exactly the same game. I'm going to call this the phonics. This is the phonetic, but instead of phonics, why don't we call it visualetics or something? Somebody come up with a good word. The ietics or whatever. What is that? The ocularetics. But we're talking about the world of the ocular, and it's so simple compared to the world of anatomy and the anatomy of trees, the anatomy of folds, and the anatomy of all these other underlying ideas that relate to reality, but not to this world of sight. Anyway, and then I mentioned paint handling and best methods and all that sort of stuff. The best methods come to you once you accept this is what the science is, and you have to be good at. And you'll have to separate yourself from all the other things and get good at this, and then look back and say, now where do I incorporate all these other things that I thought I knew, and maybe rightly at certain points, right? So the idea of proportions, I didn't talk much about that, but of course proportions, one of the things I should mention, and let me see if there's anything else. Yeah, I mentioned proportions, I mentioned angles. I should do that. Let me go do it with Sargent, because he's the guy that talks about points and angles. So when you're doing proportions, we mean proportions in every kind of which way, right? But when you have a point up here, let's just say you have, this point right here, and you have another point somewhere else, and a third one right there, then you have to be good at angles. First of all, you'll be able to articulate that as a point. This thing here is a point, and that one is a point. And then you have to be good at getting this angle right, and the distance right between these two comparatively, and the angle right between this, and the width right here between the length of this and where it would cross here, or beyond that, the width of this, when you get that in, and how wide it is in relation to this, right? So that's the entire world of the relational as it pertains to proportions, right? Well, you got to be good at that, because we are organizing this world, right? And where things land in relation to each other is what creates the figure. And don't think, by the way, that because I'm telling you all this, that we somehow dismiss the figure. Our goals are the same as yours, to paint a likeness of what we see in front of us. The beauty and the great value of the way we approach it is that you're not just going to get the anatomy. You're not just going to, what was that line in The Beautiful Mind? You're not just going to get the girl. You're going to get the music of the day, the light of the day, the color shifts. You're going to get so much more than you ever bargained for, and you'll find that you must do it. So read that I think page 17 maybe in Hale's book on Vermeer, and there's plenty of other stuff. Read the Velasquez book by Stevenson, and you'll begin to understand more of what I'm talking about. But this was finally determined to be the latest, greatest breakthrough, and what Sargent and all those guys were doing wasn't because they were dummies or lesser men or didn't have the opportunity. Sargent had every opportunity to have every education anybody else did. He chose these because there were greater advantages of them. And so hang out with this ocular science for a while, so you can figure it out how painting looks, when you paint from an ocular point of view. So that's my recommendation, and thank you for your patience in this one. This has been a long one. And see you next time.
Okay. So let's see, stop share. All right. Everybody still awake?
Yeah.
So what makes Paul the authority? What's his
Uh,
background?
well, I think he's got like, 40 years of academic, training and teaching. Um, a decent painter. But more importantly, I mean, he's done a lot of reading, done a lot of, he's got a lot of knowledge based in historical context, who was connected to who, different art movements, particularly, like I said, around the American colorist and impressionistic art movements. That seems to be his area of expertise. And I've listened to probably about 20 or 30 of his videos. They're hard to get through because he probably rambles more than I do.
Really rambles.
Yes, and that's hard to do. But it's like, okay,
Well, it's hard to keep up with what he's saying,
it is, but
trying to get across.
yeah. But I mean, if you can kind of wade through that kind of stuff and just kind of get the idea of what he's talking about,
Yeah.
it really will, in many ways answer a lot of the questions, that you guys are asking yourselves all the time. But one of the reasons I wanted to play this particular video for you, and I know it was challenging just because it's kind of a talking head thing. If you boil everything down, into simple terms, you could probably put it in a simple sentence like this, which is trust your eye. Look, make good observations, trust what your eye is seeing, and go back, over and over and over again during the process of trying to paint something and look at it, check it, make sure, are you seeing it the same way? And if you are, then, make that statement, move on to the next statement. But when you looked at how Sargent worked, when you looked at any of these guys and how they actually work either plein air or from life or in the studio, there was a process that they followed, which was really pretty traditional. But in the end, the fun and the things that make their work great work is that they were able to take those basic skills of understanding proportion, value, composition, and then they were able to take color and they were able to make it more than maybe what it was, to push it and or to subdue it, if that's what they desired to do. And that's what makes, their work, great art, is that, they understood those basic principles, those foundations. They had basic drawing skills. They saw composition, value. They understood a certain amount of anatomy in the figure. But again, like he was saying, they weren't sitting there kind of analyzing, the muscles and the bones and things when they were painting a figure or a portrait. They were going off of the visual cue of what they were seeing, and they were trying to paint, what they felt, that they were actually seeing and what was true there. And then from there, they were taking it and trying to take it a step further, with color and make it, something that's individual and personal in their own. And did anybody notice, all the artwork that he showed, how different, those paintings were from each other, in how different artists use color? You know, you would look at one artist and they would use very intense color. You'd look at another artist and they would use, you know, generally very muted color. And it's almost like an individual, you know, thumbprint or, you know, identifier. You know, you can, after a while, you can begin to look, you know, at a painting, and before you even know the signature, you know, at the bottom of the painting, you know who painted it by just looking at how they use color. So, anybody got any thoughts about that? No,
I do, but I don't want to express them right now.
you don't? Okay.
Well, it reminds me, the fact that it's kind of, I mean, I'm putting it in an analogy of playing golf, which I am crappy at, but nonetheless, you look at all the things at the point where you are swinging the club, of all the things you're supposed to remember, and basically, and then forget about them and swing. It's just like this. I mean, the whole list of things that he has there for, you know, doing paintings well. How often do you think about all those things when you pick up a brush and dip it in paint and put it on the canvas at that point in time? And it's, you know, is that too simplified?
No, actually, I think you got a great analogy there. You know, any kind of, you know, golf, you know, because there's a certain anatomy to your golf swing, and, you know, you've got to practice that over and over and over again so that it becomes second nature, right? Okay. Well, the same thing with painting. You know, you practice values, you practice mixing color, you practice, you know, getting, you know, proportions and things, you know, whether you're, you know, you don't always do that in a finished piece of work, though. And that's what I keep talking to you, all of you, about, is my life. Now, I'm just talking about my own personal, you know, life. I spend a lot of time doing studies. See, I do a lot of time doing a lot of little sketches, not finished paintings. Yeah. And the reason that I spend my time doing all of that is because when I decide to do that painting, it informs me, you know, about how I'm going to approach it, so that when I get into the actual process of painting, that in fact, you know, I have most of it, you know, figured out. So, you know, so that I'm not struggling. I'm not trying to, you know, break down and analyze, you know, what's going on, you know, with that hand or that ankle or something like that at that time. I pretty much so, you know, I pretty much so understand it at that point, because I probably painted it, you know, at least 5 or 6 times, you know, in little studies until I really worked it out. And so, you know, then I get into the actual painting, and it makes it a very different experience, you know, for, at least for me. So it goes back to kind of that idea, you know, of if you're swinging a golf club, and let's say that you go out the very first day and you've never swung a golf club, you know, it's going to feel very awkward, right? And, you know, you're probably not going to get to the green, right? You know, a month later, if you've gone out and played golf, you know, a couple of times a week, you know, your game's going to get better. You know, your game is going to get better. You're going to get a better understanding of it. And you're not going to be in your head thinking all this stuff. You're just going to be doing it because you're going to react to it. It's going to become second nature to you, right?
One would hope.
Yeah. That's my thought. Okay, for whatever it's worth. Okay, you know, that's my thought of the whole thing. So, you know, somebody asked, you know, or you know, one time it's like, okay, so, you know, if there's all this stuff and it's really all that difficult, why do people do it? You know? And the fact is, you know, you do it because it is a challenge. You know, it's you know, it's like anything else, you know, that grabs your interest. It grabs your interest because maybe you're not good at it at first, but you know, you keep at it and you keep getting better. And the more you begin to understand it, you know, it kind of expands your world. You know, you get to see everything in the world around you in a very different way. And, you know, for me, I mean, I guess that's why, you know, I've done this my whole life, you know, and it's become, for me at least, you know, my way of understanding the world around me. So, you know, if I don't understand something, one of my best ways of, you know, beginning to get some knowledge around it is to paint it, you know, because it will pique my curiosity. I'll do some reading, I'll do some research, you know, I'll do a lot of drawings, you know, I'll kind of take it apart and try to figure it out, you know, and then put it all back together again. So, anybody else have any thoughts about any of that?
Yeah, temperature, I understand the concept of temperature,
Mm-hmm.
but how to apply it correctly
Mm-hmm.
is still a puzzle to me.
Right. Well, yeah, and you know, that's a fairly advanced concept. You know, it's like once you understand, you know, shapes, values, you know, proportions, and you know, basic color mixing, you know, when you get into temperature and the subtlety of being able to shift the color temperature of a form, because you know, I talk a lot about turning form with value, right? How dark and how light things are. But another aspect of that, if you're going to become like a really good painter and become masterful at it, is understand that as those values change, the temperature has to change as well. So one part is going to generally be warmer mixtures of color. The other part is going to be cooler. And we're talking about turning form on a rounded or, you know, curved surface, okay? Not on a flat wall or anything like that. Just, we're talking about curved surfaces. And so, you know, if you begin to understand or begin to think about that shape, you know, that you're trying to paint, that form, and break it into, let's say, planes, right? And how it changes, you know, so let's say that you, here, let me do something here real quick. Let's see more. Well, okay, I don't want to rename it. I just want to, okay. Let's see, can I, yeah, okay. Aha, there we go. Okay. Yeah, I can't talk to you about my coffee cup if I've got my glamour shot up there. Okay. Can everybody see my coffee cup?
Yes.
Okay. So it's a rounded form, isn't it? Okay. And if I'm going to paint that, okay, and this is getting a little bit, you know, scientific, but, you know, every part of it from this edge to this edge that we see, we can break it down into planes, right? And we can break it down into, you know, like 3 planes, 5 planes, 8 planes, 20, 100, however many different planes you want. But, and Hawthorne kind of talked about this, where whatever the color and value and temperature is here is not going to exist on that cup anywhere else, you know, on the part that you can see, because the light here, you know, and how the light is hitting it or being reflected off the things around it is different than it is here or here. And so, you know, that's a lot to think about, because you have to shift the value and the temperature and maybe even, you know, the actual color itself here and change it to get to here. And then you got to change it again to get to here. And then you got to change it again to get to there and there. See? And it's because it's a rounded form and light is hitting it. Light's not hitting it equally anywhere. You know, it's constantly changing as it moves around there. And so you can do that with value. And, you know, in the beginning, when we start painting forms and objects and things like that, all we focus on is value, because we want to, you know, that's hard enough to get. Okay. And then you can start looking at temperature, right? And temperature will kind of inform you about the intensity and the color as well as the value here, and how it has to be, you know, maybe one color and temperature here and value versus a very different color and value on this side. And if you look at that cup, okay, like, all right, now it's got a little bit of light on it, right? And can you see the temperature shift?
Yeah.
You know, of one
the color.
side,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Okay. And so, you know, it's a very different animal, you know, over here versus here, right? And temperature will help in that process of turning form as well. And when you finally get to that point where you begin to understand not only value and color, but the actual temperature shifts that you're seeing, then your pieces will really become three-dimensional in appearance. You know, you'll really get that whole, you know, it really does feel round, you know, in your paintings when people look at it. And, you know, I think, you know, Paul said something that I think is really important for you guys to keep in mind, which is, you may not know, you know, like anatomy, okay? You may not know where all the bones and muscles and things like that are. But you already have a lot of visual information built up, you know, through your life experience of looking at people and interacting with people, of what looks natural and right and what doesn't, right? So if you get something off, you know, you're going to see it. You know, you're going to know that that doesn't quite look right. Okay. And then it's a matter of figuring out, okay, you know, what am I really seeing and how do I actually make it look right? And I think that the approach that he's talking about, which was the approach of the Impressionist and American Impressionist and colorist, you know, is a valid way of approaching it. You know, rather than doing a lot of scientific study and you know, getting into a lot of science about how light works, you know, on forms and surfaces and stuff like that. You know, if you just do a lot of painting and you make good observations and you sit and you really look and, you know, you paint what you see, you know, you'll figure that stuff out. You know, you'll figure it out and you'll figure out how to make it look, you know, correct, you know, where it works. So it's all time in the studio. So.
You know, Charles, what helped me a long time ago was that if I took a coffee cup or an apple and I put a direct light on it, just to do that part, and you can visually see it better because of the lighting makes it so stark.
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll help anybody else or not, but I mean, you could try it.
Well, you know, and you know, that's like one of the beginning steps of teaching somebody how to paint. And generally, what an instructor will do is they'll try to light that object with what they call a single light source. Okay.
Right.
And for me, you know, my simple answer is, you know, go to your kitchen, go to, you know, a room where you have a table that's sitting next to a window, you know, pull up the blinds and everything, set the object on the table, you know, and then look at it, because you're going to have light coming from one single light source, you know,
Right.
and then turn off all the lights on the inside the house, you know, don't have like a spotlight or something else on it. Because when you start adding extra light sources, then you start coming
Yeah.
up with real
Reflections.
complicated things. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, other color influences and more shadows and things that,
Yeah,
you know,
everything.
yeah. So it just gets convoluted. But with that one single light source, you know, you can
Right.
actually see, you know, you can actually see how simple it is. You know, how simple and yet complicated. All at the same
So
time.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you know, those are good studies, you know, those are good ways of learning. You know, if you look at any of the paintings that he showed you, though, you know, or if you look at any of the Impressionist paintings, outdoor or indoor, you know, and particularly, you know, the figures, you know, interiors, a lot of times, you know, there wasn't a strong direct light source. You know, there was a softness to it. And the light was kind of ambient, you know, it kind of filled the room. And capturing, you know, capturing that feeling in the painting is a challenge, you know, it really is. And, you know, when I paint a portrait or something like that, you know, Sargent used a lot of like single light source, you know, high contrast, you know, portraits. But that's not really how we see people most of the time, at least not today. You know, most of the time we see people kind of like we're seeing each other right now on Zoom. You know, there's not necessarily a lot of strong shadows, a lot of strong lights. It's kind of like softer, more ambient light. And you really got to know your stuff to pull that off, you know, and to make that work, you know, in a painting. So, you know, my suggestion is go outdoors, paint in your studio, you know, paint under a lot of different lighting conditions. But again, it goes back to paint what you see, you know, whatever you're seeing right there, you know, look at it, trust your eye, and, you know, put it down there on the canvas. So, all right. Anybody got any questions? Any comments about that video? Anything that they didn't understand? Anything we need to clarify?
Need to remember it all first.
Yeah, good luck with that. Yeah. That was it was kind of a long rambling thing. I apologize for that, but it is what it is. All right, well, unfortunately, we're gonna put up with him one more time. Now, the good news is that this is a very short video. It's probably about 15 minutes. But he's going to talk a lot about the Boston School and about Hinchey and, you know, a lot of different artists. Again, you know, I would have a pen and paper and, you know, next to my computer. And if you hear a name, you see something that you like, write it down, you know, and then you can go back and, you know, look them up. If you have problems finding any of these artists or anything, let me know, you know, and we'll kind of take a deep dive and look at some of their work, you know, a bigger body of it and get a little history and stuff on them. Okay. So always willing to do that. Okay. So let's take a look at this guy and let's wrap this up. All right. No. Yeah, Gamel and okay, all those guys. I'm glad that the audio is working on this time. Let's see, Boston School of Painting. That's kind of the one I think we want. Right? No, that's the science of appearance. Okay, we don't want that one. We want this one. Okay. I'm figuring this out little by little. We're gonna get there. All right, so away we go.
So everybody, I think, more or less knows that at the time Monet was painting, somebody, some critic or observer, used the word impressionism to describe what he was doing. And I assume it was because somewhere or other Monet and others were talking about trying to paint the impression of what they saw instead of objects, and to use a strategy that had to do with the visual phenomena in isolation, right? So it was a visual impression on your eye. Well, if you've been hanging around me much, and if you've read The Twilight of Painting, you know that Gamel gives the word impressionism. He lowers the I and drops it from an uppercase I, which applied to the Monet French Impressionists, and he gives it a lowercase I, and then describes it in The Twilight of Painting, which you should look up. Those couple chapters there, where he describes Impressionism in academic painting. And but what he essentially does is calls anything painted directly from observations right in front of you Impressionism. Now, I should have looked at that closer to make sure I'm not wrong. Sometimes you say things, you know, based on certain previous understandings, and then you elaborate just one point too far. Anybody who's spoken as a teacher knows how easy it is to do that. But I think you'll find that to be the case. I've never thought otherwise. So there's a significant difference between Impressionism, for example, if you mean that when shall we say, Leighton painted the portrait of Sir Richard Burton, which I'm not going to show, that he was doing Impressionism. He was drawing an outline of an individual who was sitting in a chair probably the whole time. You know, he probably did all that stuff, did drawings, did preliminary stuff, did precise, whatever else, and then he painted the, you know, well, for the most part, what we're calling Impressionism today really has considerably more to do with painting directly from life and using the naive eye of purely visual phenomena, as Monet describes it, and the innocent eye. So, well, what's that leading up to? David asks, he says, yeah, could you say more about the differences between R.H. Ives' Gamel and Henry Henchy approaches to Impressionism? And I've spoken to you earlier on about things that I see in certain Gamel students that suggest that the approach to Impressionism is different from Monet, and it's different from the Boston School too. I'm going to manage to probably stay mostly away from the Boston School thinking today, even though that's largely what I'm doing this for, and I'll bring enough background in. But let's just look at who Henchy is and who Gamel is as painters. They did exist at roughly the same time. So here's Henry Henchy's work, as I understand it. These are both his. But this is fairly typical of what you'd see. As I understand it, virtually all the work out of that background is palette knife work. So you can understand a certain limit to the articulation of drawing if there was any intention to make any drawing. You can also see plainly here the orientation around color and light. And Henchy says that Hawthorne, from whom he learned everything, was merely trying to teach what Monet was doing. And that's what it looks like. It really does strongly look like that. Color notes related to each other and plowed around through the picture with an afterthought being drawing. the landscapes, but these are still lifes. And again, you can correct me or not, but Henchy did demonstrations like the one in the upper left, and finished, to whatever extent he finished pictures, he finished them rather like when they were really finished. I mean, the one on the bottom with the X in the middle of it, that's interesting, is a more finished work, even though you wouldn't describe it as anything in the sense of what an academic would probably want to do. But still, it's closer to the Boston School of thinking. You can see again in all these cases, there's I think this is an artificial light one, so you can see this orientation around getting the sense of the light, and using a chroma as well as values and color. So, but that's the Henchy thing. As I said, I think even these are probably palette knives, but the bottom one looks like it could be a brush in there. Although I really haven't looked at it that close. And so here's the Monet background, right? Now that's what it is. I mean, it appears that Monet is primarily working with brushes and plenty of paint, which is certainly what's characteristic of people who want to get that color quality that Monet is doing with these intensities and broken color combinations and all those sorts of things. But you can see, I'll go back again, you can see the similarities just between the landscapes, right? Between those of Monet. And I want to say this, by the way, I'm not going to tell you I know stuff about these guys. I'm just telling you what I'm observing right here in front of you, okay? I know about Gamel, but I really want to just suggest to you, David, and others, that you really do your own observing. Use your own eyes and notice the differences between people's work. So here's Gamel in the upper left, and some people would argue that's a terrific impressionist painting. It's not a Monet impressionist painting. I mean, it's the relative limits of the color are striking. The Paxton to the right is considerably more colored, has more of a range of color. And the bunker below, of course, is probably Gamel's model in a certain sense. That is to say, he wanted as much drawing as he could possibly get, and he would much rather sacrifice color than drawing. And that is characteristic. That's probably the primary difference between these two guys. I can't tell you in that painting of Gamel's in the corner there how much drawing he did beforehand. I'd be hard pressed to think he wasn't really working on that tree, maybe at the expense of a lot of other things, but I didn't see it in evolution and development. But in all three cases here, you can see a considerable attention to outlines and to drawing. And Bunker, of course, the bottom guy was the teacher of Paxton, and of course Bunker was a hero to Gamel, and then of course Paxton was a 15-year teacher of Gamel. Gamel at one point said to Paxton, I don't know if he said he hated landscape, but that Paxton said to him, then you need to get out and be doing it, which is one of those very interesting points. Even though, and by the way, when you say that, oops, going too far here. When you say that, that's rather a significant thing, because I get the feeling that Gamel, though he hung around the Boston School guys like crazy, knew them inside out, he was rather like that in general, that he already made up his mind about what he wanted to do with painting, and really didn't look and really didn't evolve as a Boston School painter, even though he implied that he would like to have had Tarbell's understanding and abilities. So that's one of those interesting things, and I'm recommending to young people that you don't make up your mind so quickly. You might have in the back of your mind what you want to do, but make sure your first job is to be good at everything and to understand well why, in the course of what it's going to take to paint a landscape and get all the qualities of both drawing and color and light. I throw color and light in there as one word. So here's another Gamel. And you can see his dedication to drawing, but he's got a better feeling for light in both of these, but it's more like the Hudson River School in the upper one. And the bottom one, of course, you're down in a river, and I don't know if there are any sparkles of sunlight or not down in that spot. So it doesn't give us much of a chance to see what he potentially could do, but I've never seen one particularly any better than this one from the point of view of trying to reach out for what we think of as impressionist color. But there's no evidence whatever that he was approaching it from a Monet point of view with striving to really let the color carry the day. It's probably all I should say and go away, shouldn't I? But so here's on the left a drawing by Hawthorne. Hawthorne was teaching at the time that Gamble would have been around, hanging around Provincetown, I think. So this one on the right is another one of those. There's kids fishing there. This whole world was full of, I guess, Portuguese kids that were all from fishing families and that sort of thing. And the kids would be willing to sit for some money. So this is a Gamble, and this one over here is it. By the way, do you like my big arrow, guys? I forget who asked me to do that, but I was having trouble seeing my own arrow, so I decided to blow it up. In any case, this is a Hawthorne, this is a Gamble. Basically, it's almost like Gamble could have been studying with Hawthorne. There's no evidence that I know of whatsoever. And by the way, I don't think I've ever heard Gamble particularly say anything negative or positive about Hawthorne. But that's the background that Henchy comes from. He comes from this guy on the left. And this is actually what he's doing in this painting. And there's evidence of him doing plenty of others. So his training would have been similar to whatever training Gamble had at that point.
Make your holiday celebration doubly special with tender king crab legs from Kroger. Fresh for everyone.
Okay.
But Gamble, and so Gamble had the Paxton, whatever, the connection. But here again, I'm going to show you Paxton is a guy who's painting outdoor light, trying to get the color notes and all those sorts of things. But he's heavy-handed rather with the drawing. It's different. The Monet thing is different. And even here in this Hawthorne thing, you can see that it's different. This is reputed to be a Hawthorne. I can't verify that any of this is true. I'm finding this online, and I think it is, but I'd never seen one like this before by him. So it could be 4 other guys. And then when you see this, what I believe is now a Henchy, probably a demo. And if not his, it would be characteristic of the way they would carry out a painting. You can see the secondary attention to drawing compared with of course, that's an earlier phase. This isn't a demo. This is a finished painting. So, nevertheless, I've never seen a Henchy that has any level of drawing apart from that still life I just showed you a few minutes ago. Most of them are way oriented around getting the color of light. Getting effects, getting light effects to glow. And frankly, to the point of exaggerating them in ways that I find unpleasing and false. So why am I showing you this one? This is the Boston School, of course. The difference in some ways, I know I'm showing you this, because the Paxton thing is, this isn't, well, this guy's got perfectly good drawing in it. You can't see that he's into drawing. He does the drawing, but he's into the package. And Paxton, as I showed you, always feels like he's into drawing the girl, et cetera, right? Drawing the jacket. And his approach overall, apart from using Monet color, is considerably more like what you would expect in a student of Hang, perhaps. So, and again, the same thing here. There's no attention to noodling up a dress in any of these young people. Or noodling up a tree in any of these areas. Again, he's painting the visual impression, and he's using authentic. For example, he's really drawing when he's drawing this. He's really drawing what he sees. He's not making up junk to sort of suggest. That would be a little bit more typical of the what you see in those earlier Henchies, where it rather looks like he's just sort of poking at the drawing a little bit and suggesting this and suggesting that. So shouldn't have made you do that. Okay, so, and then what happens with Lack's students, and this is one of those things where I actually frankly believe that this is the conglomeration of the two, the sort of, I think both Hunter, this guy, and Lack must have hung out with Henchy in Provincetown. And I can be corrected, but the evidence is in the drawing suggests it to me very strongly. Especially the hyper color in the lac, which just is like beyond the pale, is way more like what you see in a Henchy. And yet the drawing is way more like what you would expect in a Paxton or a Gamel. So that's largely what the difference is, and you should be able to see that for yourself. So let's just, I think this is my last couple things. Let's just end with Robert Douglas Hunter. What he does is considerably more suggestive. The drawing, he's somewhere, again, he's somewhere in between. He lands closer to the Boston School than Lack does. Lack lands closer to the Paxton model with this overt, and what I would suggest to you by comparison with the Boston School, over the top drawing. So yeah, but you can see he's doing the same thing with where there's something to be drawn. He's articulate, at key points, but he's not in there making every little thing. He's articulating effects at key places, right? Drawing where drawing is needed, doing other things rather in the direction of suggestion and broader statements, grand movements of color, value into color, color into color. And yeah, so that's the best probably I can do with that. I apologize for seeming tired. Maybe I'm tired of the presentation today, but do observe these things with your own eyes. I don't have anything to add to this. My landscape work with Gamel was, in a couple summers with him was, I would say it had nothing in it like the Boston School training, but it also had nothing in it like the Henchy thing. It was something else, and I wouldn't have been able to say anything except that when we worked with Gamel, it was all about the drawing. And we knew it when we were out landscape painting. There are a couple painters alive today that, and I don't want to talk about any other painters in particular, but who have also taken Gamel's stuff, what he was offering in the classroom, and gone outdoors with it, and has paid considerably more attention to patterning, which is a really interesting phenomena. That combination, sort of a flattening out of the picture, and then paying more attention to flat shapes in their play. But sometime I'll talk to the person who does that, see if he'd like to collaborate on what his thinking is, or what his background was with Gamel that gave him that inclination. Okay, well, so David, there it is. Didn't mean to bore you all. See you next time, and please do continue with your comments, share, etc., etc. Subscribe, of course, and thank you.
Okay. So anybody see anything in there that they actually liked art-wise?
Yeah, I liked several of them. The only was kind of difficult.
Natural born talent.
Hang on one sec.
And you're unhappy with.
Okay, yeah, I gotta close this window here. There we go. Okay.
Okay, so sometimes he jumped around so much that it was kind of hard to follow who was who.
Yeah, he does that. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, but I mean, again, it's a good way of getting introduced to kind of a wide range of artists, and you may have caught the fact, he's not a huge fan of Henchy. He very much so likes and appreciates Hawthorne's paintings, who taught Henchy. And then Henchy took it kind of, like a step further. But yeah, he's not a big fan of Henchy, for whatever reason. But I guess Hawthorne had a more sort of academic approach, to his work, or slightly more academic approach. So that may, give us a reason for, his particular bias of either liking something or not liking something. But he mentioned a couple of artists in there, that were really, I mean, I hadn't seen a lot of their work, and I need to go look them up and, get to know more about them. But, that's one of the reasons I like to watch, his particular videos, is that he covers a lot of ground. He gives you, some good comparisons, but also introduces you to people who you hadn't heard of really and really looked at. So, anybody else got any thoughts about any of this? Anybody gonna have any trouble going to bed tonight?
No, we'll be fine there.
No. In fact, you'll probably all head for an early nap, after that.
Right.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, no, it's really good back. There were some interesting things and some good comparisons, but like Bob said, it was just sort of hard to follow.
Yeah. But yeah, you got to kind of just hang in there with it. And that's kind of why I suggested, having like a piece of paper and something to write with, because he does mention, he'll start talking about something and he'll mention a particular artist, and then he'll kind of drift off, in a different direction.
Yes.
That never happens with me, right?
Never.
Never. Yeah, right. Yeah. Well, yeah.
Well, having worked in post-secondary education for quite a number of years, I can relate a lot of faculty.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, if you've got a lot of stuff rattling around in your head, you have this general idea of a direction you wanted to head in, and you wanted to kind of hit certain points. And, the further you get into it, the more branches there are, the different directions you can go. So, sometimes it's hard. This communication thing, we've only been doing it for, the last 20,000 years. Oh, well, we haven't got it all down yet. So, but we're working on it. Anyway, it's 11:56. Anybody got anything that we need to talk about before we go away? Anything going on in life? Okay. Yeah, I don't really have any earth-shattering news or anything new from the county. It's all been kind of quiet over there, so we're all just kind of making it week by week.
Today is the deadline to get your order in if you want to participate in Benson's Thanksgiving luncheon.
Oh, yeah, there is that. The other thing is, election day is tomorrow, right? For local elections.
Yep.
Yeah, I don't know how many of you have been following that, but yeah. So the polls will be open tomorrow. Okay. So you might want to consider, if you're so inclined, showing up, voting, for whoever you want as a local, public officials. I don't think there are any state elections. I think it's just all county, isn't it?
City and county.
City, a lot of city.
Yeah.
A lot of city specific.
Yeah, depending on the municipality you live in.
If you are not in the city of Atlanta, you're not voting for a mayor.
No, you won't. Yeah, like me, I can't vote for Atlanta's mayor because I live in Cobb County. But I can.
I'm in Sandy Springs.
Yeah. Well, but you know, I think Sandy Springs is having some elections going on, and
There are some, there are some, yes.
yeah, and I know that Cobb County has some as well. So, you know, so anyway, I would encourage you to take part in this democratic process of, getting some say and, who's making decisions up there. So, okay.
Charles,
Yeah.
I wanted to congratulate Karen for her selling her artwork.
Yeah,
You
Karen. Do
is
I
there
have
a photo of her artwork?
No, she never showed us anything. She just talked about it. Yeah.
She said she sold it before she could take a picture of it.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Wonderful. Congratulate her. Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Very
mean,
cool.
yeah, she was on for a while, and I think, it was, probably too much for her to wrap her head around. So she didn't stay
What's
with
her
us.
last name? I'm wondering if it's the same.
Colbert.
Yeah, that's the one I thought. Yeah.
Yeah, Karen Colbert.
She did, before everybody got on, she did show some of her abstracts and what she was working on.
Oh, did she? Okay. Well, I
Yeah.
missed that, unfortunately.
Yeah, they were at the beginning.
Okay. Yeah. At any rate. Anyway, we'll be back tomorrow, 2:00. I'll try to, gather up everything you guys have sent in. I know that Eloise won't be here tomorrow, and I know that Bob won't be here tomorrow, so I'll try to move your stuff to Thursday. Okay.
Okay, good.
All right. Other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. Look outside. It's sunshiny. It's not warm.
Sunshine for days.
Yeah, it's
Bye-bye, everyone.
it's not a warm day, but it's sunny out there.
Yeah.
Anyway, see you tomorrow.
Bye.